Hello everybody and welcome to Global Power Platform Bootcamp and to my session, which is A to Z Accessibility Power Platform Edition. It's a special Global Power Platform Bootcamp because it's the fifth one, so happy birthday. I'm proud to have been part of several of them across different countries in the world, so my first time in Florida, which is quite exciting. Just wish I could be there in person. So, my name's Mike Hartley, but that may not mean anything to you, probably won't. Why should it? I have been working in the IT industry for about 30 years, plus or minus, makes me feel old. Been using Dynamics CRM or 365 since the good old days of version 3, and obviously have moved with the times and learned Power Platform as well along the way. I am exceedingly passionate about mental health, accessibility, community, diversity, inclusion, and so much more stuff. Not to give you a scary image, but I kind of get called a bit of a cheerleader for things like this, so try not to imagine me in short skirt and waving pom-poms. And as you can tell from kind of the backdrop around me, which is my home office, I am a petrol head, so yeah. I am a complete and utter geek, and I am an adult fan of Lego. I am a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional. I was awarded it a few years ago, something I'm very, very proud of. Not for the award itself, but just for the recognition that what I'm doing in terms of accessibility is having an impact. And people know me as Heart of the Midlands. You can connect with me using that QR code, scan that, it will take you to all my links on my Linktree page, or you can find me at the links there as well. Okay, what's the agenda for today? It's dead simple. This is going to be a race through the alphabet of accessibility. Now, I have tried to keep it light-hearted, I've tried to keep it fast-moving, but we've got 26 letters of the alphabet to go through in, I'm going to aim for about 45 minutes so that we've got some time for questions and answers and what have you, but we'll see how it goes. Also to allow you to get a coffee before moving on to the next session and things like that, because we all need that. So I will apologise in advance. There is lots of information, so hopefully you'll go back, re-watch the recording, head over to my website, read the actual articles, download these slides, click through them, find the information, and use this as a reference. So saying that, let's start with having a look at a bit about accessibility because before I dive into the whole A to Z, we need to understand what accessibility is. And whilst it's not always about disability, we do need to understand what disability is and what accessibility is, because how do we know what we're working towards if we don't know? So disability itself gets broken down into kind of 6 categories. You've got your physical, and this is the one that most people tend to think of when you say I'm disabled. So physical disability. You've got your visual disabilities, not just blindness, but what you may know as colour blindness, but colour vision deficiency and other visual ailments and impairments. You've got your auditory, so your deafness and your hearing limitations, also things like tinnitus. You've got your verbal, so your inability to speak or communicate, or issues with communicating vocally. You've got your cognitive, and then you've got your mental health as well. So if we look at some numbers around this, if I go off the UK, which is where I am, I'm in rugby, so yes, the birthplace of the great game. In the UK, 1 in 5 working age adults have a registered disability. 20% of the workforce is registered as disabled. The word registered there is really important because there are an unknown, hidden number of people who are not registered. I'm not. I have physical disabilities. I have mental disabilities. Why have I not registered? One, because it's a complete pain in the backside to go through the process and they can really put you through the ringer. Two, there's quite a bit of stigma still around the disabled tag, and it can be something that's difficult to deal with. That is something that I'm challenging within myself and trying to deal with, but it happens. And three, people don't always realise that they can register as disabled. So if we go off raw stats though, 20% of the UK workforce, which I'm sure you'll agree is a surprisingly large amount. Globally, we're looking at about 1.4 billion people who are registered disabled, and that does not include countries where they do not release those stats. Sure, we can imagine which countries those might be, but there are them that have quite sizable populations and they don't release those numbers out to the global audience. So that number will be greater. 70% of disabilities are hidden. Now, this includes disabilities that you can't see. People look at me and they go, well, what's wrong with you? You're not disabled. You don't know because you're not living in my body. There are also disabilities that people mask. They hide. They don't want people to know they're disabled. They keep it under wraps. And it can be for lots of reasons. It can go back to that stigma that I talked about. They can be worried about how it'll affect their work, career progression and their work life and things like that, how it'll affect them socially as well. So there are lots of reasons why people hide disabilities, but 70% of disabilities are hidden. And if we go to mental health, 1 in 4 people during their lifetime will experience a mental health issue. During COVID, it was estimated that 1 in 2 people experience mental health, and I'm sure we can all appreciate why that was, because that was a crazy period in time and it had impacts that we don't know, we don't fully understand yet, and we're going to be feeling them for some years to come. But 25% of people are going to experience mental health at some point in their lives. For some people, this is going to be a permanent thing. Most people, it's a transitory thing. It's a period of their lives. It can be a few days, few weeks, few months, maybe even a year or two. For other people, it can be a permanent thing. For me, it's been a permanent part of my life since 2007, and I don't see it going away now because it's been so long. So that's disability. Accessibility is defined as the ability to access and benefit from a system or entity. If we look at that image on the screen, that's the curb cut. It was the dip in the curb, designed and created for people with visual impairments, so blind people. It was created for people in wheelchairs so that when they're crossing the road, they don't have the step down and they don't have the step up at the other side. That has had a much wider impact because is useful for people with temporary disabilities, so people with a broken leg on crutches. The curb cut is exceedingly helpful. It's also useful for people like the elderly and parents pushing prams or pushchairs or buggies or whatever you want to call them. No step down, no step up. And that impact, where something designed for disability but has a wider impact across society, it is called the curb cut effect because of this very thing. Right, let's crack on to the A to Z, and I will say now it is not in alphabetical order. The letters it's relevant to will be at the bottom of the screen and they'll be highlighted, and I've tried to group these into some logical sections, so we will bounce through this stuff and prepare to be bombarded with lots of information, and I will try and take questions and answers at the end. I will be around and online to respond to questions. I will also be responding to questions during the playback of this as well. So the first section we're going to look at is tools, acronyms and standards, because there's a lot to take in. So first one, zooming in and reading the screen. And we're talking about things like magnifier and narrator, something called NVDA, JAWS, and there are more out there. Assistive technology, which is what we call the tools used for accessibility, takes a lot of different forms. It can come in the form of physical adaptations. So you think about the Xbox adaptive controller, the PlayStation adaptive controller that they've only just released. You think about some of the other different ways of interacting that you might see people use, eye controllers, the straws for people to control, and lots of different ways. Those are kind of your physical assistive technology. And then you've got your software assistive technologies as well, which the common ones of those, they include things like your magnifiers on screen, your zooms, and really common one is your screen readers. The magnifier is predominantly used by people who have visual impairments. Not always though. It allows people to zoom in on sections of the screen and move around and see it blown up so they can actually see what there is. And this can also help neurodivergent people because it allows them to focus in on one key area of the screen and reduce the noise that's around in terms of what's on screen. Screen readers are used again by a wide variety of people, and a surprisingly wide variety of people. They are used by people with visual impairments, so blind people, people with visual difficulties, people who struggle with dyslexia and dyspraxia or live with it will often use screen readers to narrate what's on the screen. And honestly, I've used screen readers to get a feel for it. I don't use them in anywhere near the way that these people do, because they will have them reading out at an insane rate of knots and they're taking the information in, which can also help with people with ADHD and autism, because it allows them to absorb the information, to consume the information in a different way. So let's move on to some acronyms, because let's have some alphabet soup. Nothing in IT is IT without acronyms. The most important one that kind of lives around the accessibility world is WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These were developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C, and they were designed to help build accessible websites, web apps, and that was really the focus. They have since been picked up and taken and used by a much wider audience, digital organisations, and I'm talking everything from media companies to software companies to consultancies and business practices, and they really do form the basis. They are the skeleton of that accessible world that we're trying to build. And these are standards, or guidelines I should say, that are evolving and adapting. They are always under consultation, and the latest version 2.2 was released mid to late last year, so August, September time. They're already consulting on the next versions and the next major versions and things like that. So as understanding grows, as technology grows, so the guidelines grow and the capabilities of what we can deliver grows. And we're seeing these guidelines being used within a lot of government legislation and a lot of legal requirements across the globe to define what accessible standards should be. I have a bit of an issue because they are guidelines, but governments are picking them up and saying you need to be compliant with WCAG 100%. Yeah, that's not always possible, and sometimes you can build something that's more accessible but actually doesn't meet the guidelines. But as a framework and as a starting point, they're there, they're easy to read, surprisingly enough for a technical thing. They are very easy to read, they're very easy to relate to, very well explained. Some of the legislation that incorporates WCAG, you've got the Americans with Disabilities Act and some of the sub elements of that. In the UK, we have the government design system, which defines how websites and apps within government, local government and government bodies and organisations have to look. We've got much more coming in the UK on that one, as have the Europeans. They've got the European Accessibility Act, which is really starting to gather speed, gather momentum, and requires businesses, not just governments, businesses above a certain turnover to build accessible apps, websites, digital content. Television companies, media companies, it's spreading widely anywhere where there is digital content of any form. And one last acronym for the moment, ARIA. And I'm not talking about singing an opera. Don't worry, I am not going to sing. Nobody wants to hear that. Stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. And it's a subset of WCAG. It's written into WCAG, but it's kind of its own little pocket of information and specs. And it is focused, as the name says, on rich internet applications. So moving away from just the website to the internet-based applications. And these guidelines, the ARIA spec, defines all the structures and practices for the layout, for the content, for how you interact, and a lot more besides. Again, very easy to read, very well written, and it helps define standards for all of these things along with the wider WCAG. So it really does help shape and guide and give you a starting framework. And frameworks, we all need them. Naming, things like that, naming standards. And I could not talk about naming without going with The Princess Bride. Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father, prepare to die. Classic film, and yeah, I will roll out the GIFs whenever I can. But when we think about standards and frameworks, and naming is a big part of things like that, because clear and consistent naming matters to developers. It helps with lots of things, but it also matters to screen readers users, because screen readers, if there's no accessible text, will read those names out. And if you've got developers who use screen readers while developing, they need to be able to read those names as well and know what they are and be able to debug and develop and all that sort of thing. And when you use naming and standards and conventions and things like that, they provide that important structure. They provide that skeleton, that framework that helps you out when it comes to doing the job that we all love the most, documentation. It helps you with things like support, with debugging. I'm sure many of us have experienced the joys and delights of picking up somebody else's work to work on it, to develop it further, or to debug it, and gone, what the heck were they doing? I cannot work this out. And it takes you way too long to actually just work out what they've done, what have they written, what have they designed, what have they built. Which is why we need standards. And we all love them and we all hate them. We love when other people stick to standards because it makes it easy for us. And we hate them because it's suppression of freedom and of expression and free will and what have you. And, oh, it takes too long to stick to standards, which actually doesn't if you let them form habits and they become kind of second nature. We all learn. We've just got to learn standards. I'm going to give you some standards now that are frameworks that have been developed. First one is by my good friend Matt Collins-Jones. It's for Power Automate. It's the Artemis framework, and it gives you guidelines for coding and making and structuring Power Automate flows and some of the surrounding things. He's just released version 2 of this, and it is really good and well worth checking out. You'll be able to click the links when you download the slides, and I definitely recommend checking it out. There is also the Pumpkin framework. Don't ask me why it's Pumpkin, but it is, which is a framework for Power Apps. Now, this one hasn't been touched in about 2 years. It's on GitHub, as is Artemis. But even though the platform's moved along in those 2 years, there is still a lot of really useful, applicable, valuable stuff in the Pumpkin framework, along with the Microsoft Power Apps Canvas App coding standards and guidelines. And yes, Power Apps in this instance does not have a space, because that shows you how long ago Microsoft updated theirs. It was in the days before the space. But like Pumpkin, there's a lot of core structural framework stuff that is really invaluable. Do I suggest you follow these frameworks and guidelines to the letter? No. What I suggest you do is you read them, you look at them, and you go, what is going to work for my business? What is going to help me? and you then work your way through and build your own frameworks and standards, and you can base it on this. Artemis and Pumpkin, they are on GitHub, so please contribute, please suggest, please provide feedback. I know that in the case of both of them, the authors would love to hear and have people contribute. So let's move on to developing and designing in Power Platform, and kind of wider as well in some cases. And we'll start with looking at fonts and colours in the dark and the light. I don't know about you, are you a dark moder or are you a light moder? Are you a mix? Are you a hybrid? Do you do light mode in the day, dark mode at night? Do you like some things dark, some things light? Hey, we're all different. Personally, I'm a dark moder. Main reason being, light mode, if I spend all day sat in front of my monitors with bright white light at me, I will end up with a headache and eye strain and can lead to a migraine. And that's the important thing. Colours and colour modes matter. So people with dyslexia quite often think they will have colour filters or they'll have colour tinted glasses, because applying those filters and applying those colours can help them process the words that are on the screen. Colour blindness, colour vision deficiency. Most common one is red-green that we're probably familiar with, but there are many, many more. It disproportionately affects men rather than women. But that can make a big difference to the way that you present your reports, your dashboards and things like that. People with visual impairments, if you've got reduced vision, colours can matter. If you take a look in Windows and things like that, you've got things like high contrast, low contrast, inverted colours. You've got your dark, you've got your light modes, you've got other colour modes. And people with ADHD and autism and other neurodiversities, different colours can have a overstimulating effect, or they can have a calming effect. WCAG provides some really, really good advice, some really strong guidance, and some excellent standards around things like colour contrast, making sure that your text against your background has got a sufficient colour contrast ratio. There are tools that are available to help. You can Google them, or Bing them, I should say. But you can search for them, you can find them. They allow you to enter the hex codes or do colour pickers, and they will tell you. Microsoft Office, if you're on the beta channels, you'll notice that they are more and more pushing accessible colour themes, and they're based on the WCAG contrast ratios. And if we look at Power Apps, there are various ways of implementing colour theming and switching. So you've got the new modern controls which allow theming, and that's being developed. They're coming along, they're getting there. You've got the Creators Kit that was released by the PowerCat team. That is a brilliant toolkit for anybody, full stop. But it allows you to create colour themes, and you can come up with lots of different ways of customizing. I've built a data-driven colour switcher for Power Apps. Allows you to build using Dataverse, which is my thing. You can even use SharePoint, or if you really wanted to, you could even stick it in Excel. You define a whole set of colour schemes, and in a drop down you can allow users to switch colour schemes, or you could put it on buttons, and dynamically, instantly, the colours in your Power App will change. It gives people options, and it's an easy way of implementing the high contrast, low contrast, dark, light modes and all that thing. But you also need to consider it for things like Power Pages, for Power BI, Power BI I can't stress enough, because I've seen way too many dashboards and reports where the colours, I don't have colour vision deficiency, and I'm looking at them going, I can't tell the difference between some of these shades. And it really makes consuming that information difficult. And you need to think about it everywhere. Word, PowerPoint, Excel, all the things that we do, social media, our graphic design, everything else. But that's colours. The other thing that we need to think about is the typefaces, the fonts that we use, because they are very important. If you've got a really large logo, then you can go for a nice fancy typeface that looks really swish, it looks awesome, it's epic. If you're looking at fonts on a smaller screen, you want them to be legible. You want them to be really clear and easy for people to read. You need to pick the most relevant and appropriate font for the screens and make them accessible. So I have actually tweaked the template for this, in that the main body text that I'm using is the new Microsoft Aptos font, that is the new standard font, because that has been designed in conjunction with people with dyslexia to be a more readable typeface. The bigger text, I've used the nice kind of impact type bold font, but the smaller text, I've used something that is really readable and easy to follow. So think about your typefaces. And we also need to think about our images. There's a lot of debate over who said it, but a picture paints 1,000 words. If I'm using a screen reader, the screen reader can read images. It can read a picture paints 1,000 words. It can even read the ABC at the bottom. The picture of the Lego man painting, a screen reader can't read that because it's an image. How does it interpret it? It doesn't know how. Yeah, we've got AI coming along and things like that, but we all know the mistakes AI makes. So we have to think about how we use our images. And too many words, people can't consume it all. Too many pictures, and it becomes difficult as well because you can't get the information you need across. We need to do some balance. And then we need to think about this thing called alt text, alternative text. And this is that thing with the Lego man and him, and how a screen reader can read it. A screen reader can't read the Lego man, but we can provide alternative text in the background that describes that image. If you download this slide deck, it will stick it through Accessibility Checker in PowerPoint. It will say accessibility good to go, because I've worked to make this deck accessible. That image has got alt text on it, as have all the images that are relevant. And it will say something like image of a Lego man painting a picture. The screen reader can read that alt text, and it will read it out to the user so that they know that that picture exists and what it's conveying. You need to consider the narrative. You don't want to have a huge long essay buried in your alt text. It doesn't work because it disrupts and it's too much noise. But you also want to make sure that it explains it in a way that makes the content relevant to what you're looking at. Some images are purely decorative, and you can mark them as decorative so screen readers will skip them. But please, please, please do not use that as an excuse to be lazy. Please don't think, great, I can mark all my images as decorative and I don't have to put alt text in. Because there are images that you will put in documents, that you will put on websites, that you will put in Power BI reports or whatever, that provide very important context or information or are vital to the reader to understand. In those instances, you need to put alt text. But sometimes if it's just a nice pretty picture frame border or whatever, the person using a screen reader doesn't necessarily need to know you've put a pretty picture frame around things. So you can mark it as decorative. So let's move on to thinking about the next thing. We need to think about how we lay things out, how content flows, and responsive design. Size matters. Insert the appropriate office GIF there. I haven't included it. I've avoided the temptation. And content is king. We live in an age where we have different screens, different devices, different screen layouts, different sizes. It just is the way we are. Some people have massive 4K monitors, some people have tiny monitors, some people are using phones, some are using tablets, some are using laptops. We consume our information and our content in very different ways. And when we do that, the content will, or it should, relay itself out. It should reflow or overflow. The question is that when it does the content flow properly? So can you still read all the information? Is any of it cut off? Does it follow a logical order? So think again about your screen reader users. Does it flow? Does it make sense? And even if you're not thinking about screen reader users, think about just users in general. What is the user experience like as they go top to bottom? Responsive layout, if you design it properly, if you've considered it, then it will make sure that your content does make sense. It will dictate how things move on different screen sizes. In Power Apps and things like that, you can actually test with different screen sizes. You can simulate to try it out. And the way that excuse me, the way that you can do this in Power Apps is you can use things like layout containers. These are the best ways in Power Apps. Elsewhere, you can use things like groups in PowerPoint, for example, that group and keep content together so that it flows together. And the other thing is that using containers and groups properly, ensure that people who use alternative navigation methods, keyboard users being the common one, can navigate content in a logical way. If you're using the tab key, is it jumping around in an order that makes sense? Which then brings us on. I told you I was going to try and make this flow to talking about border control and keyboard warriors. So, who knows the quote, "We are samurai, the keyboard cowboys"? If you don't know, you need to be looking in 1995 and thinking Angelina Jolie and Johnny Lee Miller. Brilliant film. And not just because of Angelina Jolie. Maybe. Now, border colours matter. When you are setting up a Power App, when you're building a Power App, when you're building a website and you're designing your style sheets and things like that, when you're thinking about developing full-blown applications and things like that, border colours matter. If we go into Power Apps, you've got the main border colour on an object that indicates a surround. You've got the hover border colour, so what happens when my mouse is hovering over and it indicates that my mouse is on there. And you've got this property called focus border colour that's a little bit hidden away because it's only in the drop down, it's not in the main panel. And that is the equivalent of hover border colour for keyboard users. And focus border shows where you are if you've used the keyboard to navigate to it. They are essential for keyboard users and for people who use things like eye tracking, so that they know where they're hovering, where they're looking, where they are currently focused on. And believe it or not, keyboard navigation, it still matters. The mouse, this little rodent thing, may have infested the world and it may have taken over, but not everybody can use mice. That was my spare mouse. My main mouse is this thing, and it's a bit weird because it's a vertical mouse. Because if I use a standard mouse for too long, pain radiates up my arm, into my shoulder and into my neck, and it causes me a lot of hurt. I have to use a vertical mouse, which allows my bones not to twist. But there are days where even using that is too much pain for me, and I use the keyboard. Excuse me again. And every single one of us will use keyboard shortcuts in some form. Control C, Control V, copy and paste. Guarantee that we've all used that at some point. We all use keyboard shortcuts. We all use things. And tabbing around, sometimes it's just quicker than using the mouse. Where that comes in is when we're defining things like tab index orders or indexing, and where we define the order of our content, because we then consider how it's laying out and how it's going to flow. And when we talk about layout and how it flows and getting to content, we need to think about how we can jump to content and the menus. So when I say jump, I'm hearing Van Halen in the back of my mind with epic keyboard riffs, hence the image of a waiter playing a keyboard. Navigation and control. Wherever we are, whatever we're using, apps, dashboards, portals, reports, lots of things like that. Navigation and control is really important to that user experience, that user interface, to being able to find what we need to do, to being able to know what we can do. It allows users to access content and functionality with ease. So think about a table of contents in a document, or a list of shortcuts down the side of Microsoft Docs website. They allow you to jump to the content that is relevant without having to go through everything. Likewise, menus, hamburgers, stacks, waffles, traditional menus. I am feeling really hungry right now. They allow you to show the users what functionality is available. They allow the users to access that functionality, and they are really key to good experience. If they're logical, navigable and understandable, then it works well for all users, but in particular for people using assistive technology or with accessibility needs, it helps them understand and use and embrace the content and the deliverables that you have created. One thing I will say is we need to make sure that we are very, very consistent in where we put these things. I have used genuinely apps where the menu started in the top left, it then moved to the top right, and the next thing I know it's at the bottom left. And if you're using a magnifier and you're having to hunt for where the menu is, it's not good experience. It's not helpful. For any users, it's not helpful, but if you're using Magnifier, if you're using Screen Reader, if you're using other technology, it's not helpful if things move around. So be consistent. And it is a really, really key part of a good user interface and user experience. Yeah, it's really important for people with accessibility needs, but it is that really important thing. Because what we need to do is we need to keep it simple. There can be too much information. Help. Do you like the Beatles? People have accused me of using 1,000 words when 10 will do. And yeah, sometimes I do waffle and I apologise. But when we're creating content, when we're creating apps, we need to keep it focused on what is the thing that we're trying to get across. What is the important point? What is the important info? We need to make sure we're not burying it in a sea of unnecessary fluff. So make sure we're highlighting that important information. Make sure we're focusing on it. Make sure we're really getting that message across. The rest of it, we can stick on other pages. We can stick on other tabs. We can provide links to it so people can dive in if they want to, if they've got the time to. Not everybody does, and quite often you take Power BI dashboards. I've seen them where people have crammed in so much onto one page that you can't understand it. You don't know what they're trying to say. Focus on the key stuff, and if people have got time, they can go to another page to do a deep dive. And talking about pages and keeping it simple, help. It's not so easy to press F1 to open a help file anymore, because if you do that, in most cases it'll open your browser's help because we're using web apps and things like that. So let's find a way to provide help in accessible formats, because we build all this great stuff, we design all this great stuff, and we roll out new features. What good is it if nobody knows they're there, nobody knows how to use it, nobody knows how it all functions? What that leads to is support requests, questions, people coming back, and us getting frustrated because it's like, oh, seriously, it's just there, just use it. No, we need to be writing help. Now, there are different ways. You can use accessible text properties and tooltips, so long as they get rendered by screen readers, and you can try them for yourselves. You can download NVDA for free. Windows Narrator is built into Windows. Try them, give them a test, put yourself in those shoes. And we can also write help panels that slide out, or help pages that you can navigate to. But one thing I will say is please be very, very careful using pop-ups. Pop-ups can be an accessibility nightmare. There's no sugarcoating it. They can be difficult to navigate or impossible to navigate to with a keyboard. The biggest one is quite often screen readers don't know that a pop-up's appeared on the screen because they don't get the message, and then they are unable to read them and process them. And I've even seen it when trying to use Windows voice control, where pop-ups have appeared and voice control has not been aware of them, so I've not been able to react to them using my voice, because yeah, I've tried voice control. And there's lots of things. Now, some people have said they've managed to make pop-ups work. I'll be honest, I personally haven't found a reliable, consistent way of doing it. I have no doubt that people have found ways. I need to do a bit more research. But please, if you're using pop-ups, test, get people to help you out, get people to test it using the technologies. And yeah, use them sparingly. Please don't go overboard, and just make sure they work with assistive technology. Final bit in the development bit is experimental features. Yeah, I'm a bit of a geek. I have got a Windows 11 device running on Canary build. I run Edge Dev as well as Edge Beta and Edge Final. Yeah, I like living on the cutting edge. I also like rolling out the features in the Power Platform as soon as the new release waves get released. And I love playing out with the experimental features and the preview features. And I would encourage you to. Because what we've had is we've seen things like improved keyboard navigation coming as a preview experimental feature. Yes, it went generally available and it's there now, but I played with it when it was experimental. We've got modern controls. Again, they're in preview. And you've got the new look in model-driven apps that's there to provide greater accessibility. Preview features you can switch on, you can toggle, you can have a play with. Don't use them in production. I would never say use preview in production, but I would really strongly recommend that you kick the tires, you try it out, you give it a go, you give it a whirl and you see what you can do. And then you're prepared for when they are released and you can roll those features out. So we're in the home stretch now and we're looking at the people and the processes and some quick wins. So user experience and validation of the same. The clues in the name, users. We need to consider the user experience and the user interface from all sorts of different angles. We need to be thinking about the alternative methods of navigation. We can all try using a keyboard to navigate. That's not difficult. We can all try using screen readers. We can download them, we can run them. But we need to consider how that all works. We need to think about visual impairment. Try using magnifier. We need to think about ADHD, autism, overload, too much information, all that stuff. And I realise there is an irony that I'm doing a dump of loads of information. I'm saying don't do too much information. But design whatever you do in coordination, hand in hand, work with people who use assistive technology or who have accessible needs. Think about them, work with them. As it says in the big bold box there, nothing about us without us. We can fall into the trap of ableism where we think we've built something accessible because we've given it a go, we've given it a try, we've thought about it, we've tried to put ourselves in those shoes. But unless we live in those shoes, we're just projecting what we think, what we expect, and we shouldn't be doing that. So make sure we get accessible users to then do all the testing along with our other users, get them to provide feedback, take it on board, work out how you can do that. Build that open forum, build that safe space where people can speak, where people can talk, where you're asking questions, you're getting the feedback, you're taking it all in, and listen to what they're saying. Please listen. I can't say this enough. Listen to what they're saying, take it on board and work out how you can implement it and how you can make adjustments. So let's give you some catchphrases because these are actually really quite crucial ones. I've dumped a load of information on you and it can be overwhelming, and I know that. The key is progress over perfection. We've all got to start. We've all got to make a start. We cannot build something that's 100% accessible because that just doesn't exist. It is not possible. So We start on a journey. We work our way through. We do some quick wins. We get ourselves into some new habits, and then we build on those and we go on the journey. Because at the end of the day, one size fits one. What works for one accessible user will make things harder for another. One person's disability will impact them differently to another person who might have the same disability in name, but the impact of it will be different on them. It genuinely is a one size fits one. There is no one size fits all with accessibility. That does not exist. And we need you. You watching this now, you are needed, as are your colleagues, as are your businesses, as are your organisations, your communities. We need you to be thinking accessible, to be thinking inclusive, to be thinking, how can I bring in everything that I do to make sure it reaches the widest audience? I'm pretty sure that none of you are sitting there, I really hope none of you are sitting there going, oh, I deliberately want to exclude this group of people from being able to use this. I'm pretty sure you would probably, from a commercial sense, if not a humanitarian sense, be thinking, I want the largest number of people to be able to use what I do. So please, we need you. Make a start and get on the journey. Remember that you can't be perfect because it doesn't exist. But there are some quick wins to help you get started. And the question that can be asked is, how do you eat an elephant? The answer is one bite at a time. You start with the first bite. Journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. And there are some simple starting points that, believe it or not, these starting points will make a huge difference straight away. Colours. Think about your use of colours. Contrast, options. So your high contrast, low contrast. That will make a huge, massive difference. Alt text everywhere. I cannot stress this enough. Social media. Don't put images on social media without including alt text. Websites, Word docs, all those things. Use alt text. Get in the habit. Reduce the noise on your content. Think about that focused, too much information thinking. Look at it and go, what are the points that I really want to get across? And find and include people who use assistive technology. Please, that is really the most important thing. Build that community, build those people, include them. And I realise I have gone way over the 45 minutes that I was planning, and I'm nearly at the hour. So hopefully I'll have answered questions as we've been going along, but please feel free, drop some questions in and I will stick around and answer them. And while you do that, please do check out my QR code, go to my link tree, read my blog, connect with me on LinkedIn. We can have these conversations. I'm more than happy to talk to people, more than happy to even schedule a call to talk to people and hear and share and things like that. But thank you very much for joining today. Thank you for our sponsors, Upzoids and Microsoft, because without them, events like these wouldn't happen. But thank you. Have a great day. Enjoy the rest of Power Platform Bootcamp. And hopefully one day I will make it out to Orlando and get to meet some of you. But until then, have fun and thank you. Bye-bye.